Hey y'all, so I am coming to you with a really quick message from God. Let's talk about monitoring spirits. So, what is that? You may have heard it if you've listened to something on Instagram or a prophetic voice on YouTube, or even if your pastor may have mentioned it in church. What exactly is it? Well, a monitoring spirit is a spirit that is sent to find out where you are when it comes to God's assignments, when it comes to what God is telling you to do. And then they are sent to distract you. So they are sent to distract you from accomplishing whatever goal God has just given you to do. For instance, when God told me to do my podcast, people's opinions distracted me from doing what God was doing, what God wanted me to do. I remember in the very beginning, I wanted to have like this real pretty scene, and I wanted the whole setup because of things that I had seen online. And when I finally came to terms where I really didn't need any new things, all I needed was my laptop and the word that God gave me and my phone, and I was good with that. The day that I came to that realization, I went and asked 3 different people their opinions. I recorded a video and I asked 3 different people their opinions, and everybody said something that distracted me from the conclusion God and I had just got to, which was I did not need everything else that I wanted. Those people, their words made me feel like it wasn't enough, which discouraged me from going through with the podcast again at that time. Now, at this point, I've had the podcast for over a year, like a year and a half at this point. So I'm good, but I definitely was distracted because I allowed other people's opinions to distract me from what God was calling me to do. And those people, they weren't wrong. Let me clear this up, because a monitoring spirit does not make the person who is being used as that vessel, it doesn't make that person bad. I want you to think about Ephesians 6:12, for we fight not against flesh and blood, but against the unseen evil rulers, the unseen principalities. A spirit is just put into that person, and that person is sent to ask us for progress. What's going on in your life? How is this going? How is that going? Do you really think you should be doing that? Do you think that's a good idea? I thought you didn't really like him like that. I thought you didn't really like her like that. I assumed you was going to do something else. Why you won't wait for it to look like this? I don't think you should be going there right now. That's what a monitoring spirit does. A monitoring spirit through a person, that's what they do. They come to try to get feedback. They try to get status updates on where you are in life. And if you are not strong, well, let me say this, because I feel like I'm a person that's really, really strong in my faith. And if God says something, then that's what it is. But sometimes when you have those moments where you are really weakened and you go to somebody and you kind of cry on their shoulder, they'll say something to you that makes a lot more sense than what God has told you, because we already know God just be saying stuff that do not make sense to us. But he said that in Isaiah 55:8. Our thoughts is not his thoughts, his ways are not our ways, because he thinks and he sees and he knows higher than us. So everything that he tells us to do, it's almost never going to make sense at the time he tells us to do it. Yet we are still to follow, and we want to follow without letting as many people know as possible, because what those people do is what the enemy does is the enemy will use the people who is closest to us to distract us from the purpose that God has given to us. The thing about it is the enemy knows where God is taking us before we know. So I would say the enemy and God are almost eye to eye with the knowledge that God wants to do, what he wants to do within us. The enemy knows before you know that God wants to make you a business owner. The enemy knows before you know that God wants you to be a married woman or a married man. The enemy knows before you know that God intends to bless you and you become a millionaire in the next 3 years. He knows that. And so he's going to pull all the stops to distract you from getting to that point, because he knows things that you don't know. The only way to avoid being distracted by a monitoring spirit is to not let people know what's going on in your life. To not tell people what's going on in your life. Something good happens to you, keep it quiet until God says, because there will be a point, especially if you are being used for God's purpose. God wants to get the glory. So he's going to use you to tell people your testimony and get people back to him. So he's going to use you, but it's not for you to always go and tell everything at the time that you want to tell. Like somebody might get married today, and you may not know about it for the next 6 months. At that point, at the 6-month mark is when God wants them to release it to the world. Everything ain't for everybody to know at the time that it happens. And so in this season, God is calling for us to be very discreet and very quiet about the things that he is doing in our life. Don't tell anybody. It could be your best friend, the best friend in the whole wide world. If God does not release you to tell that person, do not tell that person. It could be your mother or your father. It could be your children. It could be your sister or brother. It could be your pastor, y'all. It could be your pastor. If God does not release you to tell people what's going on in your life, do not tell them. Don't tell them. This is not the season for us to be getting distracted because we have run our mouth too much. This is not the season for that. And I'm thinking about that story. It's in 2 Kings, I believe. Remember that story of where God sent that prophet. He sent that prophet into a town and he told them, don't eat anything, don't drink anything, don't stop anywhere here, and do not come back home the same way you came. The prophet came and saved the king. The king invited him to have a feast. The man said, no, God told me don't do this. Then somebody overhears that and they go to their father. And the other prophet has gone to take a rest or whatever. And so this other prophet comes and says, hey, are you the prophet that did XYZ? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, yeah, you should come home with me and feast. Like, let's have a feast. And the man says, no, God told me don't eat with nobody, don't drink with nobody, and don't go back home the same way I came. And that man says, oh, no, I'm a prophet too. God told me it's fine for you to come. And instead of going back to God and instead of following God's instruction, he allowed this person to distract him from the very purpose that God had given him. So he went to that man's home and he feasted with him. And in that moment, that false prophet had to reveal to that man that he had lied. Not only had he lied, but he was going to be killed by a lion when he left that man's home. All because he couldn't stay the track. And he couldn't stay focused on God's purpose. He allowed a monitoring spirit to distract him from the purpose that God had already given him. God had already given him instructions. When God gives you something, you stick to that. You don't focus on nobody else's opinion. You don't focus on nobody else's way of doing things. I remember when I started my podcast, my brother has a podcast. And so I'm learning all the different things and ins and outs and stuff of it. Then he started giving me his opinion and started giving me how to do it and stuff like that. Oh, you need to do it based off this. You need to gauge your audience with this. You need to do it like this. It almost distracted me. Except God had already let me know it wasn't on me to focus on who my audience was. I'm just supposed to put the message online. It's going to reach the people that it's intended for. So if you go on my YouTube, you're going to see I don't have a whole bunch of subscribers. I don't get a whole bunch of views. I'm okay with that. Because it's going to reach the people who it's for. It may not be for people right now. It may not be for somebody for another 2-3 years. And at that point, that's when that message is going to reach them. But I'm not going to be focused on, dang, I didn't get to 50 subscribers. I didn't get 50 views. I didn't get this. I didn't get that. I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on the message getting across. I pray that it always reaches the person that it's for. Whether they come across it on Instagram, whether somebody sends it to them from YouTube, whether they see it on Spotify, however they see it, I always pray that it gets to the person that it is for. But I can't get caught up on that because I go online and I see this podcast episode has 1 million views. This one has 260,000. I'm not focused on that. God built me different. I'm in a different lane. So the message here is don't allow and guess what, y'all? And I think that's where God was taking me. A monitoring spirit does not always come in the form of another person. It's a spirit. You are not invincible from spirits. You are very susceptible to spirits. So that monitoring spirit can come in the form of doubt, fear, worry, imposter syndrome. That monitoring spirit can come in any form, because guess what? Its goal is to interfere and interrupt what you are doing, interrupt what God is doing in your life. So yeah, you can be the monitoring spirit. You can holster the monitoring spirit. But you got to stay in God's presence. You got to stay connected to God so that he can lead you and so he can let you know, daughter, that's not of me. Son, that's not of me. This is not the time for you to be telling your business to anybody. This is not the time for you to be letting people in on what God is doing in your life. God wants you to keep it on the hush hush. He will let you know when it's time for you to release details to the world. He will let you know when it's time to broadcast your pregnancy. He will let you know when it's time to broadcast your marriage. He will let you know when it's time to broadcast that business endeavor, that newest business venture. He will let you know when it's time to release that. Until then, shh. Shh. Don't say nothing to nobody. Don't matter who it is. Hush.